My name is Lila, and I'm 34 years old. What happened to me last Christmas still feels like a wound that refuses to heal. For as long as I can remember, Christmas had been the one untouchable tradition in my family. No matter how chaotic life became, no matter what arguments or distance lingered between us, Christmas was the one day when everyone showed up. I grew up in a modest two-story home, where the kitchen was always filled with warmth on Christmas morning. My mother would start baking before dawn, filling the house with the smell of cinnamon and nutmeg. By the time my cousins and aunts arrived, the living room was alive with noise, children tearing open presents, uncles arguing about football, and my grandmother sitting in her rocking chair, soaking it all in with a satisfied smile. Those memories shaped me. They made me believe that family was something unshakable, something you could always fall back on no matter how much the world outside tried to wear you down. That belief carried me through my 20s when I was hustling to build a life for myself, and it comforted me in my early 30s when my business finally took off in ways I could have never dreamed. I had poured my soul into my wellness brand. What began as me mixing natural oils and herbs in my kitchen had grown into a company that stocked products in boutiques across the world. I was suddenly wealthy beyond what my younger self could even imagine. Mansions, travel, designer clothes, I had them all. But wealth didn't erase the girl who cherished simple traditions. Despite my success, I never missed a family Christmas. I showed up every year with handmade gifts, with laughter, with a heart that still craved belonging. And then, last December, everything changed with one single message. I was in my office that night, sifting through product proposals, when my phone buzzed. The notification was from the family group chat, a place usually filled with silly memes, inside jokes, and plans for gatherings. Smiling, I picked it up, already imagining my cousin Marnie announcing her Christmas dinner menu. Marnie always hosted, and her over-the-top decorations and endless platters of food had become a staple of the holiday. But my smile faltered as I read her words. "Hey everyone, just a quick update about Christmas dinner. We've decided to keep it small this year, just immediate family. Lila, please don't take it personally, but we think it might be better if you sit this one out. Hope you understand." I blinked, convinced I'd misread it. I read it again. And again. But the words didn't change. My heart sank into my stomach. My own cousin, someone I had grown up with, someone who used to share her toys and secrets with me, had just told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas. My hands trembled as I scrolled down. My aunts and uncles had all replied with some version of, "Sounds good," or, "Looking forward to it." Not one person had spoken up to question why I was being excluded. Not one had defended me. The betrayal cut so deep it felt like I couldn't breathe. I sat there in the dim light of my office, my phone heavy in my hand, staring at the screen until the words blurred. This wasn't just a dinner invitation being revoked. This was my family, my blood, deciding that I didn't belong. And the worst part? They tried to sugarcoat it. To act like it was nothing personal. But how could it not be personal when the exclusion had my name written on it? I thought back to all the times I had been there for them. When my uncle lost his job, I quietly paid his mortgage until he got back on his feet. When my cousin needed money for law school applications, I covered the fees without hesitation. Even when my younger sister wanted to start her own side business, I gave her a no-interest loan and never asked for it back. I never flaunted my success. I just wanted to help. And now, somehow, that generosity had been twisted into arrogance, into something they despised rather than appreciated. My chest ached as tears filled my eyes. It wasn't about the dinner, it was about what it represented. They had all silently agreed that I didn't belong at the one event I valued most. And the silence in that group chat was louder than any cruel word they could have spoken. I dropped the phone onto my desk and buried my face in my hands. All the memories of past Christmases, of joy and togetherness, felt tainted. I tried calling my aunt to get some explanation, but she avoided my questions, mumbling something about keeping things simple and not wanting things to feel awkward. I hung up before she could finish, her excuses stabbing me like knives. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. My success hadn't changed me, but it had changed how they saw me. In their eyes, I wasn't Lila, the cousin, the niece, the sister. I was Lila, the millionaire, the one who made them feel small by comparison. And instead of embracing me, instead of celebrating the fact that someone from our family had achieved something incredible, they had chosen to push me away. The pain slowly morphed into anger. Anger that the people I loved most had weaponized my success against me. Anger that they would rather erase me from their table than deal with their own insecurities. I could have shrunk myself, hidden my accomplishments, pretended I was still struggling like them, but why should I? I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to dim my own light just to make them comfortable. That night, as the clock struck midnight, I made a silent promise to myself. If they didn't want me at their Christmas table, fine, but I wouldn't sit alone at mine, sulking in pain. I would create something bigger, brighter, and unforgettable. Something so breathtaking it would force them to see me not as a burden, not as an outsider, but as the powerful woman I had become. I didn't know it then, but their rejection would spark a plan that would change the way my entire family saw me forever. The silence after their message was louder than any insult. The days after being disinvited from Christmas felt like walking through fog. Every time I opened my phone, I half expected a message from anyone saying it was all a mistake. That of course I was welcome, that the text had been poorly worded, that they loved me and couldn't imagine Christmas without me. But the apology never came. The group chat continued as though nothing had happened. They shared jokes, finalized meal plans, even discussed who would bring dessert, and not once did my name appear again. At first, I tried to convince myself it wasn't deliberate cruelty. Maybe they truly did want a smaller gathering. Maybe they thought I'd be busy, or that I had better plans. But the lie crumbled quickly. The truth gnawed at me like a constant itch I couldn't scratch. I wasn't left out by accident, I had been pushed out on purpose. One evening, my younger sister, Hannah, called me. She had been avoiding me since the message, but her voice on the phone carried the weight of guilt. "Lila," she whispered, "I need to tell you something. But you can't say it came from me." My heart tightened. "What is it?" She hesitated, then let out a shaky breath. "The reason they didn't want you there, it's because they think you make everything about yourself now. They say you flaunt your money, that you've changed, that you look down on them." Her words sliced deeper than the original disinvitation. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles whitened. "Flaunt my money?" I repeated, my voice trembling between disbelief and anger. "Are they serious? I've never thrown my wealth in anyone's face. If anything, I've gone out of my way to downplay it." Hannah rushed to defend herself. "I know, Lila, I know you're not like that, but it should hear the way they talk when you're not around. They think you only come to show off. Like when you bought gifts last year, remember the designer bags for Aunt May and Cousin Joe? They said you did it to make them feel small." I closed my eyes, pain flooding through me. I had spent weeks picking out those gifts, wanting to give them something luxurious, something special. I never imagined they would twist generosity into arrogance. "They're jealous," Hannah added softly, almost apologetically. "They don't know how to handle what you've achieved." Jealous. The word echoed in my mind. Jealousy had been the silent shadow in my life ever since my business took off. Friends drifted away, claiming I was too busy. Old colleagues whispered behind my back. But I had never thought my own family would fall victim to it. After the call, I sat alone in my living room, the twinkling lights of my Christmas tree reflecting in the glass windows. The decorations felt mocking now, a cruel reminder of the celebration I was barred from. The more I thought about it, the more the betrayal twisted inside me. These were people I had supported countless times. When Uncle Ray's business almost went bankrupt, I wrote a check to keep it afloat. When Cousin Melissa's car broke down, I bought her a new one because I couldn't stand seeing her struggle. I had always been there, never asking for anything in return. And now, those same people whispered that I was arrogant, that I thought I was better than them. The anger began to harden into resolve. I refused to let them define me with lies. I refused to let jealousy rewrite the truth of who I was. That night, as I stared at the glow of the Christmas lights, an idea began to form. It wasn't a petty plan, not the kind of revenge that comes from bitterness. It was something deeper, sharper, something that would turn their jealousy into awe. If they thought I was too much, then I would give them too much in a way they could never forget. The thought electrified me. Instead of crying over their rejection, I would reclaim my power. I would remind them of everything they had tried to erase: the strength, the success, the generosity that they had mistaken for pride. I could see it already, the blueprint of something extraordinary. A Christmas celebration that would outshine anything they had ever imagined. A table so grand they would regret ever closing theirs to me. The next morning, I woke with more clarity than I'd had in weeks. I poured myself a cup of coffee and opened my laptop, fingers flying across the keys as I began researching. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at their modest dinner. I was going to build my own stage, bigger than anything they could ever hope to create. Of course, part of me hesitated. A voice in my head whispered that maybe this was childish. Maybe I was stooping to their level. But no, this wasn't about vengeance in the traditional sense. This was about showing them what they had thrown away. About reclaiming my dignity from the ashes of their rejection. I remembered something my father used to say. People fear what they don't understand, and they resent what they can't control. My family couldn't understand my success, and they couldn't control the way it made them feel, so they tried to diminish me, but I wouldn't let them. As the sun rose higher that morning, casting golden light across my living room, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to celebrate Christmas, I was going to orchestrate an event so unforgettable it would etch itself into family history. They wanted to keep me out? Fine. But I would make sure that, by the time I was done, they would never be able to stop talking about me again. That was the night I decided if they wouldn't let me join their table, I'd build one so big they'd beg for a seat. When most people get hurt, they sulk. Me? I booked a jet. The plan that had been simmering in the back of my mind needed a stage, and I knew exactly where it would unfold. Tucked away in the turquoise waters of the Caribbean was my private island. Very few people in my family even knew I owned it. To them, it was probably just a rumor, a whispered exaggeration of my success, something they half believed and half resented. I had bought the property 2 years earlier, not as a trophy but as a sanctuary. Whenever the noise of the world grew too loud, I would disappear there for weeks at a time, soaking in the silence, the salt air, the sense of being completely untouchable. The island wasn't barren. I had transformed it into something out of a glossy magazine spread. A sprawling villa sat at the center, whitewashed walls gleaming against the green palms and blue sky. Scattered across the beach were smaller guest bungalows, each with glass walls that opened onto private decks overlooking the sea. The staff, a loyal team I treated like family, kept the place running year-round. There was a chef who could turn any meal into art, a groundskeeper who knew every tree by name, and a small crew that maintained the boats and equipment. Until that moment, the island had been my secret haven. But now, it would become the stage for my redemption and my family's reckoning. I picked up the phone and called my assistant, Mara. She had been with me since the early days of my business, back when my office was a cramped apartment kitchen. She knew me better than most, and she didn't even flinch when I said, "Mara, we're planning the most unforgettable Christmas party this world has ever seen." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "I assume this has something to do with your family?" "Exactly," I said. "If they think I'm too much, I'll give them more than they can handle. But it has to be perfect. No, beyond perfect. I want them to step onto that island and feel like they've walked into a dream." Over the next hour, I rattled off ideas. Endless lights draped across the palm trees, a feast fit for royalty, live music that drifted across the waves, fireworks that painted the night sky. Every detail needed to scream abundance, not in a vulgar way, but in a way that couldn't be denied. Mara scribbled notes and said, "Consider it done. When do you want this ready?" "Christmas Eve," I replied. "If they're going to cast me out of their little dinner, then I'll host something so extraordinary they'll never forget what they lost." After the call, I sat back in my chair, adrenaline pulsing through me. For the first time since the disinvitation, I felt alive again. The hurt was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing, it was fuel. The next few days blurred into a whirlwind of preparation. Mara coordinated shipments of decorations, imported ingredients, and arranged for entertainers to be flown in. I spent hours on calls with designers and event planners, ensuring that no corner of the island would be untouched by the spirit of Christmas. The villa itself was transformed into a palace of light. Golden garlands wound up every staircase. Crystal ornaments hung from ceilings that reflected candlelight in dazzling patterns. The dining hall, which normally sat a comfortable 20, was expanded with outdoor tables stretching toward the ocean, each covered in white linen and glittering with candles. Even the beach became part of the stage. We built fire pits surrounded by plush seating, ready for late-night stories under the stars. The children would find a playground of sorts, giant inflatable slides, treasure hunts mapped across the sand, and stockings filled with toys waiting in every bungalow. But as perfect as the setting would be, there was still one critical piece missing: how to get my family there. I couldn't simply call and invite them, too much pride stood in the way, and I refused to give them the satisfaction of rejecting me twice. No. I needed a lure. Something mysterious, something they couldn't resist. That was when the idea struck me. I would send invitations, but not in my name. Each envelope would be sleek, black with golden embossing, the kind you'd expect from a royal gala rather than a family gathering. Inside, only one line would be written: "You're invited to Christmas Eve on Paradise Island, pack light. Everything else will be waiting." No signature, no explanation. Just intrigue. I smiled as I imagined the confusion it would cause. They would argue, debate, speculate, but their curiosity would win. After all, who could resist the promise of a luxurious mystery? And once they were there, once they set foot on my island, the truth would unfold like a curtain being drawn on the grandest stage of their lives. I finalized the plan with Mara, who oversaw the printing and delivery of the invitations. Each was hand-delivered by courier, adding to the air of exclusivity. I booked a private charter jet under a neutral company name, ensuring there would be no trace of me until the moment I chose to reveal myself. As I reviewed the final arrangements, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. Was I going too far? Was this excessive? But the doubt vanished as quickly as it came. They had excluded me, mocked me behind my back, and reduced me to nothing more than a caricature of arrogance. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and making sure they never dared silence me again. By the time Christmas week rolled around, everything was in place. The island glittered under the Caribbean sun, ready for its guests. The chefs had menus prepared that could rival Michelin-starred restaurants. The decorators had outdone themselves, creating a holiday wonderland where snow would have felt out of place, yet Christmas radiated from every detail. All that was left was to wait. And as I looked out across the endless ocean from my villa balcony, I couldn't help but smile. My family had tried to erase me from their table, but in a matter of days, they would walk straight into mine, one they would never forget. And with every hour that passed, I could already picture their jaws hitting the floor. Nothing makes a person more curious than being excluded from a secret. The invitations were delivered on a crisp December morning. Each one slipped into the hands of my family members with an air of mystery. Black envelopes sealed with golden wax, elegant lettering spelling out their names it was impossible to ignore. My courier team had instructions to say nothing, to simply smile and place the envelope in their hands. Inside, a single line was written in bold script. "You're invited to Christmas Eve on Paradise Island, pack light. Everything else will be waiting." No signature, no explanation. Just a promise wrapped in intrigue. I knew my family well enough to predict their reactions. Confusion would come first, then suspicion. Then, inevitably, curiosity, the most dangerous motivator of all. That evening, I sat at my desk with a glass of wine, phone in hand, watching the family group chat erupt into chaos. "What is this? Did anyone else get one of these?" wrote my cousin Melissa, posting a photo of the black envelope. "Yes, mine came this morning," Aunt May replied. "Is this some kind of prank?" Uncle Ray chimed in, ever the skeptic. "Probably a scam." Don't go clicking any links or calling numbers. But there were no numbers, no links, just the words and the promise. Soon, more photos popped up in the chat. One by one, they admitted to receiving the same invitation. Even Marnie, the cousin who had so graciously disinvited me, posted a picture of hers. This is so weird. Who would do this? For a few minutes, they speculated wildly. Some thought it might be a promotional stunt from a company. Others joked that it was the setup for a murder mystery. Then the arguments began. I think it's legit, Melissa wrote. The paper, the seal, the whole thing, it's expensive. Whoever sent this knows what they're doing. It feels exclusive, Aunt May agreed. Like some luxury event. Why us, though? The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. Why them? Because they were my family, the very people who had thought me unworthy of sitting at their humble dinner table. Now they were on the receiving end of something they couldn't comprehend. The debate stretched late into the night. Some swore they wouldn't go. Others admitted they were intrigued. Then came the breaking point, a second delivery. That same night, each family member received a follow-up package, boarding passes for a private charter jet. Departure time, the 24th of December, 10 a.m. Departure city, the nearest major airport to all of them. First-class seats, their names printed in gold across the tickets. If the first envelope sparked curiosity, the second ignited full-blown obsession. This isn't a prank, Marnie typed. This is serious. Someone is flying us somewhere. But who? Uncle Ray demanded. Does it matter? Melissa replied. It's a free trip. Look at these tickets. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. Just as I had predicted, the allure was too strong to resist. They didn't know who was behind it, but they couldn't turn away from the possibility of luxury. In the days that followed, the group chat turned into a frenzy of speculation and preparation. Some argued it could be a reality television show stunt. Others whispered about wealthy benefactors or secret inheritance games. The mystery was eating them alive. Meanwhile, I stayed silent, watching every word unfold like a private performance. On the 23rd of December, the day before departure, the tone of the chat shifted. Excitement outweighed fear. Pictures of packed suitcases appeared. Melissa joked about buying new swimsuits, just in case. Even Aunt May, usually cautious, admitted she was strangely excited. And then came Marnie's message, the one that made my chest tighten with satisfaction. I almost feel guilty, like, whoever organized this, maybe it's someone we overlooked? Either way, we can't say no. This might be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Oh, the irony. If only she knew. The night before, I barely slept. Not out of nerves, but anticipation. Everything was ready on the island. The villa gleamed with lights. The dining tables stretched across the sand like something out of a dream. The chefs had rehearsed their menus down to the last garnish. The staff moved like dancers in a perfectly choreographed ballet, preparing every corner of the island for my grand spectacle. But the most delicious part of it all wasn't the food or the lights, it was the reveal. The moment their feet touched the sand, their eyes widening in wonder, and the realization dawning on them that the person they had cast aside was the very one who had orchestrated this paradise. I pictured Marnie's face when she saw me descending the staircase, her carefully built sense of superiority crumbling in an instant. I pictured Aunt May, who had whispered that I acted too good for them, realizing she was standing in a world I had built with my own hands. I pictured Uncle Ray, who once accused me of buying affection, staring at a feast he could never have imagined affording. The thought alone kept me warm as I stood on my balcony that night, staring out over the sea. The waves crashed softly against the shore, carrying with them the scent of salt and freedom. The island was quiet, waiting. Tomorrow it would roar to life. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, as though the universe itself approved of my plan. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my place, my dignity, my story. They had tried to write me out, but I would return in bold letters across the sky. And as I set down my wine glass and whispered to myself, I knew this was the beginning of something they would never forget. The stage was set, and all I had to do now was wait for them to walk into the trap. Christmas Eve arrived, and so did my family, though they had no idea who they were walking toward. The morning of the 24th of December dawned bright and crisp. While the rest of the world hustled through crowded malls and icy highways, my family was being chauffeured to a private airport, each of them clutching their golden-printed boarding passes with wide-eyed disbelief. I had arranged everything down to the smallest detail. Black luxury sedans pulled up one by one, drivers in tailored suits stepping out to open the doors. My family members emerged carrying neatly packed luggage, their expressions caught somewhere between suspicion and awe. The private jet gleamed on the runway, its silver body reflecting the morning sun like a jewel. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the steps, and uniformed attendants stood at attention, offering warm smiles and trays of champagne flutes. I wasn't there, of course. I watched everything unfold through a discreet live feed arranged by Mara. From my villa, I sipped coffee and studied their faces as they climbed aboard. Marnie, my cousin, looked nervous, her eyes darting around as though she expected hidden cameras. Aunt May clutched her pearls, whispering a prayer under her breath. Melissa, on the other hand, looked like a child on Christmas morning, snapping photos of everything and laughing in delight. Once everyone was seated, the jet roared to life. Leather seats, polished wood interiors, gourmet snacks, the cabin itself was another layer of mystery. The attendants served champagne and canapés as the plane took off, leaving behind their small suburban world and lifting them into the clouds. The chatter grew louder as the flight continued. "This must be some company event," Uncle Ray said, trying to mask his curiosity with skepticism. "Nobody just spends this kind of money for no reason. Maybe it's a reality show," Melissa suggested, sipping her champagne. "Like one of those things where they reveal it all at the end." Marnie shook her head, frowning. "No cameras, at least, none that I see." Her voice wavered, though, betraying the fact that she was just as intrigued as the rest. Hours later, the jet descended over the Caribbean, and the view out the windows stole their words. Emerald waves sparkled under the sun, wrapping around a crescent-shaped island crowned with lush greenery and golden beaches. Gasps filled the cabin as they pressed their faces to the glass, pointing and whispering in awe. When the jet landed, sleek black jeeps waited at the runway. The passengers were ushered inside, their luggage whisked away without them lifting a finger. The drive through the island's winding paths was like something out of a dream. Palm trees arched overhead, strings of fairy lights twinkling between them, even in daylight. Flowers in every color bloomed across the landscape, their fragrance drifting through the open windows. Then, at last, the jeeps pulled up to the villa. From my balcony, I watched as the cars rolled to a stop, and my family stepped out. For a moment, they just stood there, frozen in awe. Before them rose the grand villa, its white stone walls draped in golden garlands, its balconies glowing with lanterns that flickered in the warm breeze. Holiday music floated through hidden speakers, soft but inviting. Staff in festive uniforms approached, offering cool drinks and trays of tropical fruit. Children squealed as they spotted the massive Christmas tree towering in the courtyard, adorned with ornaments that sparkled like jewels. Marnie's jaw dropped. Aunt May pressed her hand to her chest. Even Uncle Ray, the eternal skeptic, looked humbled. They whispered to one another, too stunned to speak at full volume. Who could have done this? This must cost millions. Is this really for us? I stood hidden, behind tinted glass, watching their wonder with a quiet smile. Every gasp, every widening eye, every stunned expression, it was the payoff for weeks of planning and months of hurt. The staff guided them to their bungalows, each one tailored to perfection. Personalized stockings hung by the doors, filled with small gifts and handwritten notes, signed only with a golden initial. Beds were draped with soft linens, chocolates placed on pillows, and windows open to views that took their breath away. The family explored like children let loose in a candy shop. Melissa ran from room to room, laughing. The kids shouted with glee when they discovered the treasure hunt waiting on the beach. Aunt May wept quietly as she touched the garlands strung across her balcony. And still the same question echoed among them. Who had given them this? Who had thought them worthy of such grandeur? As they gathered later that evening in the grand hall, the whispers grew more frantic. They sipped wine, admired the glittering decorations, and speculated endlessly. Some wealthy friend? Marnie asked aloud, though no one answered. Maybe a sponsor, Uncle Ray muttered. Somebody trying to impress us. Melissa grinned mischievously. Or maybe a guardian angel. I nearly laughed at that. A guardian angel. Hardly. But perhaps, in some twisted way, they weren't entirely wrong. The anticipation in the room was palpable, every face flickering with curiosity and unease. They had been delivered into paradise without explanation, and though they enjoyed every luxury offered, they couldn't ignore the gnawing need to know. I waited, hidden, watching them from behind a veil of shadows. My heart pounded with the thrill of what was to come. Soon, I would step into the light. Soon, their questions would be answered. Soon, they would see the truth of who had brought them here. But not yet, not until the moment was perfect, and when I finally stepped out to greet them, their expressions would make every ounce of pain worth it. When I appeared at the top of the grand staircase, silence fell like a curtain. The air in the grand hall hummed with nervous excitement. My family had gathered after exploring their bungalows, still reeling from the shock of the island's beauty. The long dining tables stretched across the hall, each one glowing under chandeliers that sparkled like ice crystals. Chefs carried out silver platters, the scent of roasted meats and spices filling the room. Laughter flickered here and there, but underneath it ran a current of unease. Every glance, every whisper circled back to the same unanswered question. Who was behind all this? I watched from the shadows at the top of the staircase, my pulse pounding with anticipation. My dress clung in crimson silk, flowing behind me like fire. For weeks, I had imagined this moment, their faces when the truth was revealed. The betrayal I'd endured had been bitter, but the satisfaction of reclaiming my power would be sweeter than any dessert the chefs could serve. One of the attendants clinked a glass, calling for silence. The music softened, and the room quieted into expectation. The stage was mine. I stepped forward, heels clicking against marble as I descended slowly down the staircase. At first, there was only confusion, a flicker of recognition, quickly overtaken by disbelief. Then the gasps began, sharp and scattered. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth. Aunt May nearly dropped her glass of wine. Marnie's face drained of color, the proud confidence she always wore slipping away like water down a drain. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said, my voice steady, echoing through the silence. The words hung in the air like a challenge. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as though time itself had paused, holding its breath. Finally, Uncle Ray broke the silence. "Lila?" His voice cracked with something between shock and guilt. This is yours?" "Yes," I said simply. "Welcome to my island." The reactions came in waves. Melissa laughed nervously, shaking her head as though she couldn't believe it. Aunt May whispered a prayer under her breath. One of the younger cousins clapped their hands in delight, blissfully unaware of the tension rippling among the adults. And Marnie, dear Marnie, looked like she had swallowed a stone, her lips parted but no words emerging. I stopped at the foot of the staircase and swept my gaze across the room, meeting each set of eyes. "Since I wasn't welcome at your table," I said, calm but deliberate, "I decided to make my own." The silence deepened. My words landed with precision, piercing the very wound they had inflicted. Aunt May shifted uncomfortably, her cheeks flushing. Melissa avoided my gaze, focusing on her wine glass as though it might provide an escape. Uncle Ray coughed, trying to mask his unease with gruffness. And Marnie, her face betrayed everything. Regret, shame, but also pride, clashing against itself in a storm she couldn't control. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The restraint in my voice carried more weight than anger ever could. A staff member discreetly resumed pouring wine, breaking the tension just enough for people to move again. The room began to breathe, though the atmosphere had changed irrevocably. Every laugh now sounded hollow, every smile forced. They couldn't ignore the truth. The very person they had cast aside was the one who had brought them into paradise. I let them stew in that realization. I mingled among them, gracious but distant, smiling without warmth. When they asked questions, "How long have you had this place?" or "When did you plan all this?" I answered with calm vagueness, never offering more than they needed to hear. Because this night wasn't about answers, it was about reflection. Dinner was served, and the tables groaned under the weight of the feast. Platters of lobster tails glistened with butter. Trays of roasted duck and beef tenderloin lined the center, surrounded by bowls of seasonal fruits and golden breads. Desserts glittered like jewels, each one crafted with delicate precision. They ate, but the joy was muted. Every bite tasted of guilt, every sip of wine a reminder of the woman they had abandoned. And though I smiled, though I raised my glass in silent toasts, I could see the heaviness in their eyes, the dawning understanding of what they had done. It was exactly what I wanted. As the meal ended, I stood once more, commanding the room's attention. "I hope you're enjoying yourselves," I said softly. "I wanted you to have a Christmas you'll never forget." Melissa whispered something to Aunt May, who nodded silently. Even the children quieted, sensing the gravity of my words. I let the silence stretch before finishing. Because after this, things will never be the same again. The weight of the sentence fell on them like a stone into still water, sending ripples across every face. Marnie looked as though she might cry. Uncle Ray stared down at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. Aunt May dabbed at her lips with a trembling napkin. I sat down, leaving them with their thoughts, the cliff edge of my words hanging over them like a storm cloud. The feast had ended, but the reckoning had only begun. And deep inside, I knew the night was far from over because I had much more in store for them. When the plates were cleared, I asked for everyone's attention. The clatter of silverware faded as the last course was removed, leaving only the soft hum of the ocean outside and the low crackle of the fire in the grand hearth. My family sat back in their chairs, full from the endless platters of food, their cheeks flushed from too much wine and too little ease. The laughter that had peppered the evening earlier had grown strained, scattered in nervous bursts rather than genuine joy. I stood slowly, letting the sound of my chair sliding across the polished floor echo through the hall. Their heads turned toward me one by one, expressions shifting from curiosity to something tighter, something wary. I raised my glass, not to toast, but to command silence. The room stilled. "I want to say a few words," I began, my voice calm but weighted with meaning. "Not just because it's Christmas, but because there are truths that need to be spoken tonight." No one moved. Even the children fell quiet, their small faces reflecting the tension that hung in the air. I looked around the table, my gaze lingering on each of them, on Uncle Ray, who had once told me I was too big for my britches, on Aunt May, who had whispered behind my back that success had changed me, on Marnie, who had typed the words that cut deeper than a knife. "You're not invited." My chest tightened, but I pressed on. I grew up believing family meant unconditional love, that no matter how much the world turned its back, this table, our table, was where we could always come home. My voice trembled for a moment, but I steadied it. But this year, I learned that even family can betray. A murmur rippled down the table, but no one dared interrupt. I set my glass down and folded my hands in front of me. "Do you remember all the times I was there for you? When Uncle Ray's business nearly collapsed, and I covered the debts so you wouldn't lose your home? When Melissa's car broke down and I bought her a new one because I couldn't stand to see her struggle? When Hannah needed money for school and I wired it without hesitation? I never asked for repayment. I never asked for recognition. I gave because I believed that's what family does." The silence deepened. Their faces shifted, some pale, some flushed, some frozen in shame. But instead of gratitude, I continued, I was met with whispers, with jealousy, with resentment. Instead of seeing me as the same girl who grew up beside you, you decided I was something else, something to be excluded. I let the words sink in, my voice dropping lower. You told me not to come. You erased me from Christmas. Marnie flinched as though I'd struck her. Aunt May's eyes brimmed with tears, she tried to blink away. Uncle Ray cleared his throat but kept his gaze fixed firmly on his plate. I want you to understand what that did to me, I said, my voice firm now. For weeks, I sat alone wondering why I wasn't enough for the people who were supposed to love me most. I asked myself what I had done wrong, how success could possibly be a crime. And then I realized it wasn't me who changed. It was you. You let envy poison what we had. You turned love into suspicion. You turned family into strangers. The weight of my words pressed into the room like heavy stone. I could see it in their eyes, the guilt, the regret, the dawning realization that they had been caught in their own pettiness. I softened slightly, not out of weakness, but because I wanted the truth to land fully. I didn't bring you here tonight to humiliate you. I brought you here so you would see me. Not as the woman you whisper about, not as the caricature of arrogance you've painted in your minds, but as who I really am. A daughter. A sister. A cousin. A woman who has worked for everything she has, and who only ever wanted to share it with the people she loved. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant crash of waves against the shore. Then Melissa, tears streaking her cheeks, whispered, "We were wrong." Her voice cracked the silence, and suddenly others followed. Aunt May bowed her head, murmuring apologies. One of the younger cousins reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Even Uncle Ray, stiff and prideful, muttered, "I didn't realize. We didn't realize." But Marnie sat rigid, her face pale, her eyes wet but defiant. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, swallowed by the shame she couldn't yet put into words. I nodded once, acknowledging their apologies but not rushing to absolve them. Forgiveness was not something I would hand over like another extravagant gift. It had to be earned. I picked up my glass again, raising it slightly. So tonight, enjoy this feast, this beauty, this island, because after this Christmas, things will never be the same again. The words fell like a blade, clean and sharp. Their faces shifted, some stricken, some desperate, all realizing that while I had given them a paradise tonight, tomorrow might bring a reckoning they weren't ready for. I sipped my wine slowly, deliberately, before sitting down again. My silence after that was louder than any speech could have been. Their faces fell, and I knew the words had pierced deeper than any luxury could ever heal. You could feel the shift in the air after my speech. For a long while, no one dared to move. The table that had been alive with chatter and laughter minutes earlier now sat steeped in heavy silence. The clinking of silverware had ceased, glasses stood untouched, and every flickering candle seemed to cast long shadows across their guilty faces. I had dropped my words like stones into still water, and now the ripples spread outward, touching each of them in ways they couldn't hide. Melissa was the first to break. Her hands trembled as she reached for her napkin, dabbing at her cheeks. She whispered something to her husband, who wrapped an arm around her shoulders, but her eyes stayed fixed on me, wide and wet with regret. Aunt May sat rigid in her chair, her pearls twisted tightly between her fingers as though she were praying for a way to turn back time. I could see the shame written in every line of her face, her lips pressed into a trembling frown. Uncle Ray shifted uncomfortably, his usual bluster gone. He had always been the loudest at family gatherings, the one cracking jokes, filling silences with stories. Now, he barely looked up from his plate, his jaw tight, his pride slowly eroding under the weight of truth. And then there was Marnie, my cousin, the orchestrator of my exclusion. She sat stiff-backed, her hands clenched in her lap, her face pale. I watched her swallow hard, her lips parting as though she might speak, only to close again. She looked like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar, unable to face the consequences of her actions. No one knew what to say. They picked half-heartedly at their plates, forced smiles slipping when they thought I wasn't watching. Conversations sputtered to life, only to die within seconds. Even the children, usually immune to adult tension, had grown quiet, nibbling on their desserts with wide, cautious eyes. I sat calmly, sipping my wine, letting the silence do my work for me. I didn't need to raise my voice or scold them further, the truth already rang louder than any accusation I could make. The unease spreading across the table was proof enough that my message had struck home. Eventually, Melissa found her courage. She leaned forward slightly, her voice unsteady but sincere. Lila, I'm so sorry. We shouldn't have. We were wrong to treat you that way. Her words hung in the air, trembling with emotion. All eyes turned to her, then back to me. I offered her a faint smile, neither forgiving nor condemning. Thank you for saying that. The tension cracked just slightly, like ice beginning to melt. But the room remained fragile. Aunt May cleared her throat, her voice barely above a whisper. She's right. We should never have excluded you. It was cruel. And small of us. Her hands twisted her pearls tighter. I hope someday you can forgive us. I inclined my head but said nothing. Silence was my weapon now, and it spoke volumes. Uncle Ray shifted again, his pride warring with guilt. He finally muttered. Didn't think it mattered that much, thought maybe. You'd prefer doing your own thing. Guess we were wrong. His words were defensive, but even he couldn't mask the shame in his eyes. Marnie stayed quiet. Her silence was louder than any apology could have been. Her pride was still fighting, but I could see it crumbling, piece by piece, beneath the weight of what she had done. The rest of the meal was subdued. Laughter tried to resurface but came out thin and hollow. Even the music, still playing softly in the background, sounded strained, like it didn't belong in the room anymore. I watched them all carefully, memorizing every twitch of discomfort, every flicker of guilt. They wanted to enjoy the luxury around them, the villa, the feast, the island, but the memory of their betrayal sat like a shadow at the edge of their plates. When dessert was served, an elaborate display of chocolate sculptures and spun sugar, the children gasped with delight, but the adults barely touched theirs. It was as though the sweetness turned bitter in their mouths. After the plates were cleared, some drifted into small groups, speaking in hushed tones. I moved among them, graceful and poised, my presence alone enough to unsettle them further. Wherever I went, conversations faltered, eyes dropped, apologies hovered unspoken in the air, but I remained calm, kind, even. I wasn't cruel, didn't lash out. I let my composure stand as its own kind of mirror, reflecting their shame back at them. Later that evening, as the fire roared and glasses of brandy were passed around, Marnie finally spoke. Her voice was tight, her words chosen carefully. Lila, I didn't mean for things to turn out this way. We just thought. She trailed off, unable to finish. You thought excluding me would make you feel better about yourselves, I said evenly. Her face crumpled, and she nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She tried to speak again, but her voice broke, and she fell silent. No one rushed to defend her, no one excused her actions. The truth was too raw, too obvious now. I let her sit in that silence, the same silence I had sat in weeks ago when the group chat erased me from Christmas. Now, it was her turn to feel its sting. The night wore on, but the atmosphere never recovered. They lingered in the hall, talking quietly, some sneaking glances at me as though searching for a sign of absolution. I gave them none. Forgiveness would not be so easily won. By the time the guests retired to their bungalows, the weight of the evening clung to them like a heavy coat. I could see it in their shoulders, in the way they avoided each other's eyes. As I stood on the balcony, watching the waves crash against the shore, I felt a strange calm. The tables had turned. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the center, and they knew it. But even then, they had no idea the final twist I had planned. The next morning, I called everyone together for one last surprise. Dawn broke over the island in a wash of gold, the sun climbing slowly above the horizon and scattering diamonds across the surface of the sea. The air was warm, touched with salt, and the faint scent of blooming hibiscus. From my balcony, I watched as the island stirred awake. My family emerged from their bungalows, some yawning, some whispering quietly, all still heavy from the previous night's reckoning. They looked different now. Less confident, less entitled. The grandeur of the island had overwhelmed them, yes, but it was my words that had cut deepest. I could see it in their eyes. Guilt lingered like smoke after a fire. I let them gather in the villa's great hall, where the towering Christmas tree glittered with ornaments, ribbons, and soft twinkling lights. Beneath its branches lay dozens of small envelopes, each one sealed with the same golden wax that had marked the invitations. When everyone had assembled, I stepped forward. My crimson dress flowed as I moved, the hush of fabric echoing through the still room. Their eyes followed me, waiting, unsure if this gathering would bring more confrontation or something else entirely. "I have one final gift for you all," I said, my voice steady but tinged with something softer now. "Last night I told you the truth. Today I want to give you something more." I gestured toward the tree. "Each of you has an envelope under those branches. Please, take yours." They hesitated at first, glancing at each other as though waiting for permission. Finally, Melissa stepped forward, crouched, and picked up an envelope with her name etched on the front. One by one, the others followed, until each of them stood with a sealed envelope in hand. "Open them," I instructed. The sound of tearing wax and crisp paper filled the hall. Then, silence. Melissa gasped loudly, her hand flying to her mouth. This can't be real." Her envelope contained a letter of tuition payment, covering her daughter's full college expenses, every fee, every book, every detail taken care of. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the letter to her chest. Uncle Ray's hands shook as he unfolded his. Inside was a formal agreement to invest in his failing business, enough money to not only save it but expand it into new territory. His eyes widened, then softened, his pride breaking under the weight of relief. Aunt May opened hers with trembling fingers. Out slipped a deed to a small lakeside cottage, something she had always dreamed of but never thought possible. Her lips quivered as she stared at it, whispering a thank you too quiet for most to hear. Even Marnie, who had sat rigid with guilt all morning, opened her envelope to find a certified check large enough to clear her debts she had hidden from nearly everyone. Debts that had weighed on her shoulders for years. She blinked rapidly, her breath catching, her face pale as though she didn't know whether to cry or collapse. The room buzzed with disbelief. My family looked around at one another, clutching their envelopes, overwhelmed. No one spoke at first. The enormity of what I had given them rendered them speechless. Finally, Melissa whispered, her voice breaking. "Why? After everything we did to you, why would you do this?" I stood tall, meeting their eyes one by one. "Because I refuse to become what you made me feel. I refuse to let bitterness define me. I give not because you deserve it, but because I choose to rise above it." Their gazes dropped, heavy with shame. Some wept openly now, unable to contain the mixture of guilt and gratitude coursing through them. Even Uncle Ray, usually stone-faced, wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. I continued, my voice calm but firm. "These gifts are not a bribe, nor a plea for love. They are a reminder of who I am. You tried to cast me aside, but I will not let your jealousy or pettiness diminish my generosity. I wanted you to see that true strength lies in kindness, even when it's hardest to give." The words sank deep. I could see them wrestling with their emotions, thankfulness clashing with guilt, awe clashing with regret. They had expected anger, maybe even revenge. But this was something they couldn't have predicted. The children, innocent to the undercurrents of adult betrayal, cheered as they discovered toys and treasures tucked into their stockings. Their laughter rang through the hall, pure and untainted, softening the edges of the heavy moment. I looked at them, those little faces full of joy, and for a brief second, I remembered why I had loved Christmas so much as a child. Not for the gifts themselves, but for the magic of being together, of believing in something bigger than ourselves. The adults, however, could not escape the weight of what they held in their hands. Their eyes were wet, their throats tight. One by one, they approached me not with entitlement, but with hesitation, with humility. Melissa hugged me tightly, whispering apologies against my shoulder. Aunt May kissed my cheek, her tears wet on my skin. Even Uncle Ray gripped my hand with trembling strength, his voice rough as he muttered, "Thank you. I don't deserve this." And Marnie stood frozen, envelope clutched to her chest. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no sound came. She looked at me, eyes brimming with shame, then dropped her gaze, unable to meet mine. I didn't force her. Her silence was answer enough. When they had all returned to their seats, I addressed them one final time. This Christmas you will remember not just the gifts, not just the beauty of this island, but the lesson behind it. I hope you carry it with you long after you leave. Because generosity without gratitude is wasted, and forgiveness without change is meaningless. The hall fell silent once more, but it wasn't the silence of guilt this time, it was the silence of awe, of recognition, of hearts cracking open under the weight of truth. But even generosity has its limits, and I was about to draw the line. With the gifts given, I knew it was time to set the record straight. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the villa, bathing the great hall in a golden glow. My family still clutched their envelopes, their hands trembling, their faces caught between astonishment and shame. The room was heavy with unspoken emotions, gratitude, regret, confusion, all swirling together like a storm no one could quite name. I stood at the front of the hall, my crimson dress brushing against the polished marble floor, and raised my hand for silence. The chatter died instantly. Every pair of eyes locked on me, waiting. "You've received your gifts," I began, my voice calm, even gentle. "And I hope they ease some of the struggles you've been facing. But before this Christmas ends, there is something else I need to say, something that matters even more than these gifts." The room tensed. I could feel it in the Bracketisluff, in air, like the hush before a thunderclap. "For years," I continued, "I believed that love alone was enough to hold a family together. That no matter what, loyalty and blood would be stronger than jealousy or pride. But this year, I learned that's not true. Family is not unconditional when respect is absent." I let my words linger, watching as they sank into each face. Melissa lowered her eyes, still wiping tears from her cheeks. Aunt May twisted her pearls nervously. Uncle Ray shifted in his seat, his pride fighting with his conscience. And Marnie, dear Marnie, sat pale and stiff, her envelope pressed tightly against her chest as though it might shield her from the truth. "I need you to understand something very clearly," I said, my voice sharpening slightly. "My kindness is not weakness. My generosity is not an invitation to be used, and my success is not a weapon meant to make you feel small." I paused, scanning the room, my gaze steady and unflinching. "Going forward, things will not return to the way they were. I will not allow myself to be diminished, mocked, or excluded again. If you want a place in my life, it will have to be earned with respect, honesty, and loyalty. Not entitlement. Not silence when others tear me down." The words cut deep. I could see it in the way they shifted uncomfortably, in the way shame flickered across their faces. Melissa spoke first, her voice trembling. "We understand. We were wrong, and we'll do better." "I swear it, Lila." I gave her a small nod, accepting the sincerity in her eyes. Aunt May dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "You're right," she whispered. "We took you for granted, we let envy blind us. Please, don't shut us out completely." Her words carried the desperation of someone who had glimpsed what life could be like without my presence and couldn't bear the thought of losing it. Uncle Ray coughed, his pride cracking like thin glass. "I was harsh," he admitted, grudgingly. "I didn't see what I was doing to you, didn't want to see it, but I see it now. You deserve better." Even those halting words from him meant something. But Marnie remained silent. She sat frozen, her eyes darting to the floor, her jaw tight. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't mean to hurt you." Her voice was so quiet it almost disappeared in the room. I thought if you weren't there, it would feel less." She trailed off, unable to finish. "Less what?" I asked softly, though my tone carried an edge. Her eyes flicked up to mine, shimmering with unshed tears. "Less like we were living in your shadow." The words struck, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I held her gaze, letting the silence stretch until she looked away. "If you felt small beside me," I said at last, "it's because you chose to measure yourself against me instead of standing beside me. That's not my burden to carry. Not anymore." The weight of the truth crushed the room. No one dared to speak after that. I stepped closer, my heels clicking softly against the floor. So hear me when I say this. I will always love my family, but I will not allow myself to be disrespected again. From this day forward, access to me, my time, my energy, my generosity will no longer be assumed. It will be earned. Through loyalty, through honesty, through treating me as an equal, not a bank account, not a burden, and not an enemy. My voice carried through the hall, resonant and unwavering. If you cannot do that, then you have no place in my life, no matter what blood ties us together. The silence that followed was absolute. Some looked stricken, others thoughtful, but none dared argue. They knew I was right. They knew the boundaries I was drawing were long overdue. Slowly, Melissa nodded, her tears still flowing. "We'll prove it," she whispered. "We'll prove we deserve to be in your life." Aunt May echoed softly. "We'll do better. We have to." Even Uncle Ray gave a stiff nod, the lines of guilt etched deep in his face. And Marnie said nothing. She stared at her envelope, her fingers clenched tight, her silence saying more than words ever could. I let them sit with it, the new reality settling over them like fresh snow. Finally, I softened my tone, offering just enough warmth to ease the sharpness of my words. This Christmas, I chose to forgive, but forgiveness does not erase the past. It only gives you the chance to change the future. What you do with that chance is up to you. Their faces told me everything. Some looked hopeful, others ashamed, and still others conflicted. But none could deny that the balance of power had shifted forever. I turned toward the balcony, the sea shimmering in the distance, and added one final truth. Family isn't about blood. Family is about loyalty, about respect, about standing together. If you want to be mine, you'll remember that. The words sealed the moment like a final note in a symphony. From that day forward, they would never forget that my love came with conditions, and my forgiveness had limits. When dawn broke, the island glittered under golden light, and so did my decision. The night had ended with heavy hearts and uneasy silence. My family had dispersed into their bungalows, their arms filled with gifts, their minds no doubt filled with shame, reflection, and the weight of my words. The fire in the great hall had burned down to glowing embers, and the laughter of the children had faded into the hush of the ocean waves. I stood alone on the balcony of my villa, the sea stretching endless and blue before me. The moon lingered on the horizon, slowly giving way to the first blush of dawn. The air smelled of salt and hibiscus, and the palm trees rustled softly in the early breeze. It should have been peaceful, and in a way, it was. But as I stood there, I knew my role in this story was complete. I had said what needed to be said. I had given what needed to be given. There was nothing more to stay for. This island was mine. My sanctuary. My throne. But it was never meant to be a stage for endless explanations or drawn-out apologies. I had shown them who I was, generous, powerful, unwilling to be diminished. Now it was time to leave them with that memory, untarnished by awkward morning conversations or clumsy attempts at small talk. I wanted my departure to speak louder than words. I dressed simply that morning, trading the crimson silk of the night before for a soft white linen dress that flowed like water around my legs. My bags had already been packed the night before. My staff, discreet and loyal, knew not to ask questions. They loaded the luggage quietly into the small plane waiting on the island's private strip. Before I left, I walked back into the great hall one last time. The towering Christmas tree still glowed with lights, its ornaments glittering in the dim dawn. The air smelled faintly of pine and smoke, mixed with the sweetness of last night's desserts. On the long dining table, I placed a letter. Simple, handwritten, folded neatly in an envelope. No golden wax this time, just my name signed at the bottom. The letter read, "To my family, thank you for coming. I hope this Christmas showed you not just what I have, but who I am. Carry these lessons with you when you leave. My door is not closed, but it will not remain open without respect. What happens next is in your hands." Lila, I left it there, beneath the glow of the tree, where they would find it over breakfast. When the time came, I walked quietly down to the strip. The island was still asleep, the bungalows silent, the air filled only with the sound of waves and the hum of cicadas. I passed the paths lit by fairy lights, now dimmed, their glow fading in the daylight. Each corner of the island whispered with the echoes of last night laughter, guilt, confessions, silence. But I didn't look back. As I climbed aboard the small jet, the pilot greeted me with a nod, his professionalism a balm against the storm of emotions I was leaving behind. I settled into my seat, watching as the ground crew made their final checks. The engines rumbled to life, the vibration steady beneath my feet. Through the window, I saw the villa grow smaller in the distance, its white walls gleaming under the rising sunday. The palm trees swayed gently, the beach stretched in golden arcs, the ocean sparkled like glass. My family was still asleep inside, unaware that I was already gone. I pictured them waking hours later, shuffling into the great hall in search of coffee and breakfast. I imagined the confusion when they realized I wasn't there. The whispers, the frantic knocking on my bungalow door. The dawning realization, as someone spotted the letter on the table, opened it, and read my final words. There would be silence then, and maybe tears, but I wouldn't be there to see it. The plane began to roll down the strip, gathering speed. My hand rested lightly against the window as the villa, the bungalows, the glittering tree, all of it blurred into the horizon. With a final push, the plane lifted off, rising into the sky, leaving the island and my family far below. As the clouds swallowed the view, a wave of calm washed over me. I had done what I came to do. I had turned their betrayal into a lesson, their rejection into a reckoning. I had given them gifts beyond measure, not just in wealth but in truth. And now, I was free. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes. The hum of the engines became a lullaby. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt at peace. This wasn't abandonment. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. Sometimes the loudest message you can give is silence. Sometimes the most powerful presence is absence. By leaving, I ensured that everything I had said, everything I had given, would echo louder than if I had stayed. Some lessons don't need repetition. They need space to sink in. As the island disappeared beneath the clouds, I whispered to myself, it's their turn now. Their turn to reflect. Their turn to grow. Their turn to decide whether they would rise to meet the chance I had given them or lose me forever. And as the island faded into the horizon, I realized I had given them something far more valuable than gifts or forgiveness. I had given them perspective. What happened after I left still reaches me through whispers. The morning after my departure, the villa awoke slowly. The sun poured through the curtains of each bungalow, warming faces still heavy with sleep and guilt. My family trickled into the great hall, yawning, rubbing their eyes, expecting to find me there with coffee and quiet conversation. But I wasn't there. At first, they thought nothing of it. Maybe she's sleeping in, Melissa suggested, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She deserves the rest after last night. But when hours passed and my seat at the table remained empty, confusion spread. They knocked on my bungalow door. No answer. They searched the villa. Nothing. Only when young Emma, Melissa's daughter, wandered into the dining hall and spotted the envelope beneath the Christmas tree did they realize the truth. Melissa read it aloud, her voice cracking on every line. My words simple, final cut through the room like cold wind. My door is not closed, but it will not remain open without respect. What happens next is in your hands. The letter fell silent into her lap. No one spoke. For the rest of the day, the island felt different. The garlands still shimmered, the ocean still sang against the shore, the chef still prepared meals fit for kings. But without me there, the magic dissolved. The luxury felt hollow, as though the soul had been drained from paradise. Marnie, who had avoided my gaze the night before, sat apart from the others. Her envelope of salvation, the check that could clear her. Debts remained unopened in her lap, her fingers tracing the edges as though it burned her skin. She said little, her silence thick with shame. Uncle Ray paced the terrace, muttering about how he had meant well, though no one believed it, not even himself. His shoulders sagged, the weight of regret bending him lower with every hour. Aunt May prayed quietly in the chapel I had built near the cliffs, her voice carried away by the wind, her tears falling freely at last. And Melissa, dear Melissa, wandered the halls with red eyes, reading and rereading my letter as though it were scripture. She was right, she whispered to her husband. We were blind, all of us. When the charter jet returned 2 days later to take them home, they boarded in silence. The laughter that had filled the flight to the island was gone, replaced with hushed tones and heavy hearts. The envelopes remained clutched in their hands like fragile promises, reminders of both their betrayal and my forgiveness. But the real ripples began after they returned home. In the weeks that followed, I received phone calls, voicemails, letters. Apologies spilled across every medium. Aunt May called sobbing, confessing she had let envy rot her heart. Uncle Ray left rambling messages, trying to explain himself, but mostly stumbling over the words, "I'm sorry." Melissa called nearly every day, desperate to prove her remorse. Even Hannah, my sister, wrote long letters filled with guilt, wishing she had spoken up sooner when the whispers started. And then there was Marnie. Her first call came weeks later. Her voice cracked as soon as I answered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said before anything else. "But I'm asking for it anyway." I was cruel. I was jealous. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you until it was too late. I listened quietly, offering no easy absolution. "I hear your apology," I told her. "But forgiveness takes time, and change takes proof." She cried softly, thanking me just for answering the phone. Over the months that followed, the family dynamic shifted forever. Every gathering, birthdays, anniversaries, Easter dinners was shadowed by the memory of that Christmas. The story of the island spread through cousins and neighbors, whispered about in awe and shame. To some, it sounded like a fairy tale. To those who were there, it was a cautionary tale they would never escape. They treated me differently after that. With respect. With hesitation. With a new awareness that I could not be taken for granted. The dynamic had changed permanently. When I visited months later, I didn't have to demand loyalty, it was offered. Chairs were pulled out for me, conversations paused when I spoke, gratitude flowed in ways it never had before. It wasn't about fear, it was about recognition. Recognition that I was not someone to cast aside. But I noticed something else too. Every Christmas after, there was a hush when my name came up. A glance exchanged. A pause in the conversation. The absence or presence of me became a statement in itself. If I came, the room lit up with relief, as though they had been given a reprieve. If I didn't, the silence was heavy, my absence like a ghost haunting the evening. I had become the axis around which our family revolved, not by demanding it, but by forcing them to confront what they had done and what they had nearly lost. Even years later, whispers still reached me. How Aunt May had stopped comparing herself to others. How Uncle Ray had softened, finally letting go of his pride. How Marnie had become quieter, less judgmental, as though still trying to atone for her sin. The island had left its mark on them, as indelible as a scar. And though they apologized, though they showed me newfound respect, I knew the truth. The wound would never fully heal. Not for them, and not for me. Because betrayal leaves an echo. And forgiveness, though given, does not erase it. And every Christmas thereafter, my name carried a weight heavier than any gift under the tree. Looking back, I realize being disinvited was the greatest gift I never asked for. For weeks after that fateful Christmas, I replayed everything in my mind, the text message that cut me out, the whispers of jealousy that spread like poison, the stunned faces when I revealed the truth on the island, the tears when they opened the gifts, and finally, the silence of my departure. Each memory carried both pain and power. In the beginning, it had felt like a wound I could never heal. Family was supposed to be safe, unshakable, unconditional. To be rejected by them had felt like being rejected by the very foundation of who I was. But time has a way of turning wounds into mirrors, and when I looked closely, I saw something new staring back at me. I hadn't been broken, I had been set free. Their betrayal forced me to stop clinging to the illusion that blood alone meant loyalty. It pushed me to draw boundaries I had avoided for years, boundaries I should have drawn long before the whispers began. And in doing so, it gave me clarity. Wealth had never divided us. Jealousy had. And jealousy was something I could never cure, no matter how small I made myself or how much I gave away. I finally understood that my success was not a shameful secret to be hidden, it was a light. And if they chose to see that light as a shadow, that was their burden, not mine. The island Christmas became family legend. Not as a tale of luxury, though that part dazzled them enough to repeat for years. Not as a tale of extravagance, though they could never stop describing the feast, the fireworks, the villa that looked like a dream. No, the story lived on as a warning, a reminder of what envy could destroy. A story whispered when tensions rose, when jealousy reared its head again. "Remember the island," they'd say, and silence would fall. I knew then that my revenge had not been cruel. It had been surgical. I had not sought to humiliate them, though they humiliated themselves in the mirror of truth I held up. I had not sought to cut ties, though I had cut through their illusions. My revenge had been to remind them of everything they had forgotten about me and everything they had underestimated. And strangely, that revenge birthed forgiveness. Not the naive forgiveness of pretending it never happened, not the shallow forgiveness of sweeping it under the rug, but the real kind, the kind that says, "I see what you did, I survived it, and I won't let it define me anymore." Forgiveness gave me peace, boundaries gave me strength, and perspective gave me freedom. As the years passed, I noticed something remarkable. My family did change. Not perfectly, not overnight, but slowly, steadily. They became softer, kinder. They thanked me more. Not for gifts, but for time. For presence. For simply being there. They learned to measure themselves not against me, but beside me. Even Marnie, who had been the heart of my exclusion, grew quieter. Humbled. Our relationship never returned to what it once was, but it didn't need to. Some things are meant to be rebuilt differently, with new foundations. Or not rebuilt at all. Christmas itself changed for me too. I no longer craved their acceptance the way I once did. I no longer measured my worth by whether I was seated at their table. I understood now that my value was not something anyone else could give or take away. I still loved Christmas though. The lights, the music, the warmth of giving. But I stopped seeing it as a desperate chance for belonging, and started seeing it as an opportunity for choice. I chose where to spend it, I chose who to share it with, and sometimes, that choice meant family. Sometimes, it didn't. And that freedom was the truest gift of all. Looking back, the irony makes me smile. The very year they disinvited me was the year I stopped needing their invitation. The year they thought they had taken something from me was the year I discovered I had everything I needed within myself. My island remains my sanctuary. Every year, I return there for at least a week in December. Sometimes with friends, sometimes with colleagues, sometimes alone. I decorate the villa with golden garlands, light the giant Christmas tree, and watch the sun rise over the endless sea. And as I sit there, sipping my coffee, I remember that Christmas when my life changed forever. Not because they shut me out, but because I finally let myself in. So when people ask me about my most memorable Christmas, I don't talk about the food or the fireworks or the lavish gifts. I don't even talk about the confrontation. I talk about the moment I realized I didn't need anyone else's table. I could build my own. And that, perhaps, is the real miracle of that Christmas. I gave my family gifts of money, of opportunity, of salvation. But the gift I gave myself was far greater, the gift of peace. Peace in knowing I am enough. Peace in knowing my worth is not defined by acceptance. Peace in knowing that sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply living well, loving deeply, and never dimming your own light for the comfort of others. And so, when I think of that Christmas now, I don't remember the pain of being disinvited. I remember the power of choosing myself.